What's up, everyone? It's Dakota, and welcome back to another Magic the Gathering video. And today we're going to be taking a look at some Edge of Eternity spoilers here. And honestly, I think the set aesthetically looks amazing. While I'm not necessarily a sci-fi person, you know, there's definitely a lot of things that are pretty satisfying to look at in terms of the actual cards. And to boot, the cards just feel very powerful, especially knowing that with this set releasing, that rotation is officially going to happen, or rotation part 2, whatever the case may be. And I think that's going to be a huge impact really for the standard format. And on top of that too, I think there's some cards here that could make a pretty big impact on the modern format as well. So it's pretty exciting actually getting into this set and just feeling like there's a reason to kind of care about standard while also trying to look at some of these other cards that, you know, could potentially make an impact on the modern format, which we've been playing a lot of here lately, just with that being the next regional championship to qualify for, and obviously the next one to come up and play in. But before we get too deep into the Edge of Eternity spoilers, I'm going to go over some cards that can make an impact on the competitive formats of Magic. If you're not already subscribed to the channel and you want to see more videos from me, where we talk mainly about the modern and standard format, as well as some other longer form videos for your viewing pleasure. So if that's something that interests you, please consider subscribing and ring that notification bell so you know when those videos get posted. That's a free, easy way to support me and my content. And if you would like even more content, you can go and travel down to the description down below, follow me, or go over to my Discord server and join over there with the link down below, as well as follow me over on twitch.tv/cardite23, where we try to stream at least once, maybe twice a week. It's probably going to be a little bit harder this week. There's a lot of stuff going on here in the summertime, but we're going to try to hopefully right the ship here soon. So definitely want to be following over there if you want to be notified when we go live. On top of that, there's the Casual Spikes Podcast YouTube channel. You can go ahead and subscribe over there, and hopefully we'll be able to get out of hiatus there as well. As finally, I want to thank the sponsor of the channel, Manatraders. Manatraders is a subscription service that you can sign up for, and you can rent cards on Magic the Gathering Online to play whatever decks you want, whenever you want, with basically near instant trading, where you can essentially just build your deck and then rent your deck, and you're going to have it in your hands in like the next 30 seconds. Is absolutely amazing. They just keep improving their service. There's a lot of cool rewards the longer that you are also subscribed to them. And on top of that too, if you use my code, you'll get 5% off your monthly subscription. That's absolutely huge. As a content creator, obviously, it's been great for me because I can, you know, just rent and play whatever decks I want for whatever videos that I'm recording. But on top of that too, just as a grinder and a competitive person, I want to play all different kinds of decks to kind of figure out what deck I feel the most comfortable playing for any given tournament, whatever the case may be. And Manatraders is absolutely perfect that. And again, if you use my code in the description down below, you'll get 5% off your monthly subscription, and you'll also be supporting the channel, which I do greatly appreciate. But with all that said, let's go ahead and start checking out some of these Edge of Eternity spoilers. So far, these are all the cards as of July 9th that have been kind of spoiled / released / leaked from this new Edge of Eternity set. And there's some pretty interesting cards here. I think on at least this page, you know, we have the new cycle of like mythic like planet lands that are also these kind of like operate the same way as spacecrafts. They have this station mechanic. They enter tap. They tap for a certain color of mana. So like we have Kaveron Memorial World, which enters taps for red and has station, which means that you put a number of charge counters equal to the creature's power onto the planet. When you station it, you can only station as a sorcery, so you're not able to like leave up your creatures to like block and then just kind of do what you can do with like crewing, where you can crew at any time to turn it into a creature. You have to do this at sorcery speed, but it seems like you can just tap the creature even if it's not summoning sick. Where I guess the same thing you can kind of do with crew is like the same way, but you know, it's just a different way of doing it, and you get a little bit more of a benefit. And of course, there's like counter synergies and whatever else, you know, like very small, like minute things in the grand scheme of things. But you know, for this one in particular, you pay a red, tap it, and then you sacrifice a land. You create a 2/2 robot creature token, and then creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain haste until end of turn. We've seen cards like Castle Embereth be cards that are like playable in in like standard, where you were essentially investing 4 mana to give all your creatures like +1/+0, and I don't know if it actually gave him haste or not. So like this is a way that like really on the cheap skis you can end up making essentially a 3/2 haste creature, and then giving your whole team +1/+0 in haste, meaning that you could also play like 1 or 2 more creatures or whatever the case may be, and then you can end up giving them haste with this and a buff as well to kind of help close out games. So that's something that's pretty neat. I think some of these lands are pretty cool here. I mean, we see even Adagia, the Windswept Bastion, which is the white station land, and you can pay 4 mana and tap it and create a token that's a copy of a target artifact or enchantment you control, except it's legendary, activate only as a sorcery. I mean, that's pretty cool. Like getting to copy artifacts and enchantments. There's some very powerful artifacts and enchantments that exist currently in Standard. There's also some that just exist in Magic, period. And this is just kind of a nice card where you can double up on them, and it's kind of limited in itself by making it legendary. Of course, we have different cards that can take away, essentially ignore like the legendary status of things. So like that's kind of a thing that you can kind of even build around the restriction, which is still like making a copy of a powerful artifact enchantment's good, but being able to then get rid of legendary so you can just copy the same thing over and over and over again, it can be a little bit of a benefit. We also have this Dawnspire Sunstar Dreadnought. These are cards that I don't think necessarily are going to be like major, like the Memorial World probably will see play in Standard, just because like making a even just like at the cost of like sacrificing a land and virtually 3 mana that you can make essentially a 3/2 haste and then buff your team as well is just like a really nice thing to have, is only at the drawback of having to station and just like battles where you have to kind of pick and choose, get to pick your battles basically, of like if you're going to attack the battle, if you're going to attack your opponent, however the case it works out. So that still is like a pretty powerful ability on like a land. So, I mean, I would say that that's pretty good there. Dawnspire Sunstar Dreadnought, 5 mana spacecraft. Doesn't do anything when it enters the battlefield, so it is kind of rough because some of these other ones, like as we see here, like Warmaker Gunship, enters and deals damage equal to the number of artifacts you control to target creature and opponent controls. So it does something when it comes into play, even if you necessarily don't get enough creatures or get enough counters on it to actually turn it into a full-fledged vehicle or creature. But this one in particular is absolutely amazing because it kind of works as a kind of like a console flagship, where if you get 10 counters on this thing, whenever you attack, so you don't even have to attack with this creature, obviously it's not a creature, but whenever you attack, you deal 100 damage up to one target creature and or planeswalker. That's absolutely insane. 5 mana is a lot for this, and of course, again, investing like your creatures into this to get it up to even just 10, like, is absolutely crazy. Trying to get it up to 20 is going to be pretty hard, even though you do get a 20/20 flyer, and you can easily one-shot your opponent while also essentially clearing the way for it. But I mean, just getting it up to 10 and dealing 100 damage, basically just being a removal spell on like any non-indestructible creature, is going to be, I think it's going to be pretty big. Again, probably not something that we're going to see a lot of in like Standard, but if the format does slow down a little bit and we kind of have like these big like grind fests or whatever, I think that this card could see some considerable play here. One card that does have me a little bit excited, well, 2 cards actually in this pile here. Cosmic Grand Zenith, a 3 mana 2/4 human soldier. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, you choose one. You create 2 1/1 human soldier creature tokens, or you put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. And this card in itself is essentially going to be its own army in a can. Now, we had cards like Monastery Mentor, which were 3 mana 2/2s with prowess that also made 1/1 prowess monks, and that card really saw little to no play. We saw like these small reanimator decks, kind of what we know as like the Jeskai Oculus decks in Standard, that were doing this sort of thing. And Cosmic Guard is a little bit better in the sense that you just have to cast 2 spells, but you have to be able to cast 2 spells to be able to make the creatures versus just casting any non-creature spell. This for like older formats is going to be a little tricky because, again, like while there are some ways that you can just cast spells that are, you put mana into them, but they're virtually free, or they are free at the cost of some life, or whatever the case may be, some other kind of setup where this could be pretty good. But I think for Standard, this card is going to be at least pretty well looked at, especially in the early parts of the format where, again, we are going to have rotation when Edge of Eternities is released. I do just really like the fact that this card will kind of go wide on its own, and especially since it's not legendary, just being able to put like multiple of these in play, like playing this on like turn 3 and then following up like with playing another one plus another 1-drop, kind of like what we see from like Quarry Steelcutter decks, where like they Quarry Steelcutter and then they're able to trigger it, and then they play another Quarry Steelcutter and trigger both of them. So this thing could definitely get out of control. And once you do that, once you trigger this thing like once and you make, or 2 of them at once, and you make a bunch of 1/1s, and then from there on you're just like, okay, I'm going to put 2 counters on like my whole team and just absolutely smash face. It's going to end up being pretty massive here. And another one I really like is Consult the Star Charts, which is a 2 mana instant which you can pay another 1 in blue as kicker as an additional cost. And you look at the top X cards of your library, X number of lands you control. Put one of those cards into your hand. If the spell was kicked, you put 2 of those cards in your hand. Instead, you put the rest in your bottom of your library in random order. Very reminiscent of the card like Pillage the Bog, where you can look at, I believe like X is like twice the number of lands you control. You can put 1 card in your hand. Well, this gives you the option for 2 mana to do that at instant speed rather than sorcery speed. Of course, at the cost of like more than likely casting this on turn 2, you're only able to look at 2 cards and you're going to put 1 in your hand. So it's going to be like a worse anticipate in that sense, but it's going to scale up as the game goes along, and you're not going to have to invest like a bunch of mana into it for it to be really good. Of course, if you're in those late game situations where you have 7, 8, 9 lands in play, you're probably able to pay 4 mana to get like the 2 best cards out of 9 rather than, having 7 mana and paying 2 mana to get like the best, the best 1 card out of that 9. So it's definitely it's at least interesting to me. Again, I think if games are going to go longer and we're not going to see, essentially mono red decks just kind of run over and dominate the format, especially with cards like Monstrous Rage getting banned, and of course like mono red and the Cauldron, or really like the Is It Prowess decks as we know it, just kind of definitely taking a big hit. I think that with the format being a little bit slower, Consult the Stars is going to be a lot better of a card here. Going forward, we have all the basic lands here. We have the Susar Secundi, the Void Altar. It ends up being able to pay 2 mana, tap it, sacrifice, or pay 2 life. Sacrifice a creature, draw a card equal to the sacrifice creature's power, activate only as a sorcery. We have Euthros Titanic Godcore, which essentially turns into a Tolarian Academy, which is really neat there. And again, like you need to station and get up to 12 counters to be able to activate that, or else just essentially tap for mana. And I think here we kind of reach the first card that I think could see a considerable amount of play, especially in Standard, and that is Thrumming Hivepool. So this has affinity for Slivers, so we know that Slivers are coming back in Edge of Eternities here. Slivers you control have double strike and haste, and at the beginning of your upkeep, create 2 1/1 colorless Sliver creature tokens. Now, I don't think that this is a card where you necessarily need to be in Slivers. Obviously, you get paid off massively by just playing a bunch of cheap Slivers early on, and then, if you have like the mana producing ones, then you're able to play like a Thrumming Pool probably, or a Thrumming Hive Pool, and like turn 3 maybe, with like hitting land drops plus like the affinity and being able to tap whatever. And obviously you're also gonna have to wait a turn to start getting the benefit of playing this by making 1/1 Sliver tokens. But I think that the fact that this gives 2 very powerful ability, double strike and haste, so it allows you to be aggressive on your own turn with it, while also them having haste, being able to activate potentially other activated abilities of Slivers with this sort of thing. And of course, again, being very aggressive when you have all these Slivers that kind of pump each other up. And that's something that we're going to see more in like the older formats. I think, again, if Standard is going to be a little bit slower, you could potentially see control decks playing this as like a win con. I think artifacts are a little bit harder to interact with, especially now. I would imagine players are leaning less on artifact hate thanks to Corey Steelcutter being banned. So this is like a way that you just have a continuous source of like making colorless creatures that are also going to be very threatening once they kind of hit the board. Even in like some of the token strategies, this is a way that you can essentially like for free trigger your enchantment or whatever to end up drawing cards. And then of course, like with Elspeth, you're able to double the amount of tokens, and then you're able to put counters on it. There's just like a lot of like synergies with like the token decks. There's a lot of stuff that you want for this if you're playing like the slower, like control-y, maybe not necessarily mid-range, but definitely like control decks. Like this is something you can put in there, spend 6 mana on it, and yeah, it's going to be pretty expensive, but when your opponent is kind of like top decking and you're sitting here making 2 1/1 like haste double strike creatures, and you're able to get in and deal a ton of damage, and then even then like making blockers as well to again just kind of slowly like slow down the game and everything, you can definitely get yourself into a position where you can at least convince yourself that like the Thrumming Hive Pool as like a 1 or a 2 of in a deck could actually be pretty decent, all things considered. So I think for me personally, this is a card that definitely extends beyond, being good in Sliver strategies. I think that this could be a card that you could see, again, those slower decks kind of build into and kind of have as like their win condition, because it's not something that's very easily disruptable, I would say, in the current Standard format, at least like in game ones. and the creatures are very threatening and make combat pretty hard if they're trying to get an attack, because if you just sit back and hold them back, they still have double strike and everything. So, I mean, you still have, you know, potentially 4 toughness of one creature kind of checked by these 2 slivers that you're just going to be able to continuously make over and over again on your turn. Going through this other one, I mean, like there's Extinguisher Battleship. I mean, 8 mana to destroy a non-creature permanent and then deal 4 damage to each creature is pretty massive, but I don't think, I mean, in the 5 cost to make it a 10/10 flying trampler, I mean, you could potentially make an argument that this would end up being something that is pretty powerful, but I think to me this is going to be something that's a little bit harder of a sell for a lot of competitive players. Infinite Guideline Station, just a 5 mana legendary spacecraft that's going to make a tapped 2/2 robot when it enters for each multicolored permanent you control, and then you can, when you get up to 12 counters, whenever it attacks, you draw a card for each multicolored permanent you control. So this is like a way that you can kind of go wide if you're playing like these multicolored strategies, but I think it's something like Standard, you're not going to necessarily have probably the best mana, especially since you're going to have a lot of the actual domain stuff rotating. Of course, you have like Overlord of the Hauntwoods that you could potentially like fix for something like this, but there's you need a lot to kind of go right for Infinite Guideline Station to end up getting the amount of value you want, and even then, like, you have to figure out if the juice is worth, or if the juice is worth the squeeze. So something to keep an eye on as we kind of go through all of these other spoilers. I think that this is definitely going to be a commander card that players geek out over, since now you can have spacecrafts and vehicles be your commander. I've seen a lot of people talk about Singularity Rupture, and there's another one here down too, Mutinous Massacre. These are pretty neat here. So for 6 mana, 3 blue, black, you destroy all creatures, and then each player, then any number of target players each mill half their library rounded down. So this is a board wipe / a mill card that you can play, and this kind of also helps yourself if you're kind of on this self-mill plan. Again, it is very expensive, and that's going to be the big thing, is just like, all right, all these cards are going to be really expensive to play, so you have to figure out if it's actually worth basically getting into the weeds and trying to do what they want you to do. I especially think that this Mutinous Massacre is absolutely amazing here, because you choose odd or even, and then you destroy all creatures with a mana value of the chosen quantity. So you destroy all odd or even creatures, and then you gain control of all creatures until end of turn, and you untap them and they gain haste until end of turn. So this is a way that you could essentially name a number or whatever, and then you gain control of all creatures. So like this, you could even name, you know, it says here 0 is even. You could name 0, not destroy any of the creatures, and then just gain control of all the creatures. But this is also a way that, like, if you don't want to give your opponent back like possession of their creatures, and like this isn't necessarily going to be lethal, which I can feel a lot of times this is going to end up being something that's lethal, you could just name the CMC that is going to kill the most amount of creatures and gain control of the rest of them that you're going to be able to handle, swing in, get into a massive damage, and then, you know, just end up calling it good from there. So it's very interesting. But yeah, I could definitely see a world where you just play this and the game is just instantly over. 7 mana, double black, double red is also a pretty hard sell for most decks to just try to like fit this in. So it remains to be seen how good this will actually be, but I wouldn't be surprised if this was like a, you know, end the game on the spot kind of card. We see Sammy Wildcat Captain, 6 mana, 4/4, double strike vigilance. Spells have affinity for artifacts, so you could definitely get paid off for playing these artifact strategies by just giving your spells affinity. So, you know, you don't have to necessarily play more artifacts. Obviously, they'll kind of feed into each other, but you could just end up playing some pretty big flashy spells that you can make cheaper just by playing your artifacts that maybe also produce mana or just sit on the battlefield and end up doing something later. So that's pretty neat there. It gives you something to do with all those lander tokens, food tokens, etc. Ragost, Deft Gastronaut is pretty hilarious. This is just a giant lobster citizen that makes all your artifacts into food, and then you can throw food at your opponent to deal really all your opponents. And then if you gain life this turn, you untap it. So then you're just able to continue feeding your opponents. So that's pretty cool. I don't know if this is necessarily like a card that's going to be really good in Standard, but you know, it's kind of cute. I mean, it's a funny card. Like, if you can somehow like activate this like on your turn, then activate it on your opponent's turn, and continue to do that, you know, that's going to be pretty cool. One card that I am really excited for here is the End Stone right here. So it's a 7-mana legendary artifact that whenever you play a land or cast a spell, you draw a card. And at the beginning of your end step, your life total becomes half your starting life total rounded up. So really the top half is going to be more important than the bottom half. Whenever you play a land or cast a spell, draw a card, you're just going to be able to take game actions. And, you know, this is a card that if it's the last card in your hand, essentially any card coming off the top of your deck is going to end up drawing you another card. And usually with these kind of effects, we end up seeing where your hand size is greatly reduced, or you have to discard down to a certain amount of cards, whatever the case may be. This is not limiting your hand size at all. It is, however, like affecting your life total. You know, you could argue a lot of times that you're able to kind of, and it's a way that you can use this to your benefit is that you can just kind of pay life to play spells or activate abilities or play lands, whatever the case may be, and then the End Stone will actually end up gaining you life. So in this case, for, you know, regular 60 card games, you end up going to 10 life. You know, maybe you get yourself all the way down to like 2 or 1, you end up gaining 9 life. Of course, that also means that you have like some life gain synergies there, where if you end up gaining a certain amount of life to trigger something, or, you know, you gain life, you end up getting twice that much. It does work, and you'll end up actually going past that, your life total becoming half of your starting life total. So that's pretty cool there. But yeah, I think this is just a very powerful artifact that if this hits the battlefield, I could imagine games just not lasting very much longer, like past that. Goyf, I absolutely love this card for the modern format. A 2-mana star and 1+ star. So this creature's power and toughness is equal to the number of cards you own in exile, and its toughness is that number +1. This is just something that I think is going to be amazing in standard, or in modern, excuse me. You have cards like Psychic Frog that you're going to be able to exile cards on a whim to give the frog flying, which is also going to boost the Goyf, which can make math like pretty interesting for a lot of players. Also the fact that it's, you know, 2 mana means that it kind of fits in the curve. It's totally fine to play this early and then like follow it up with a frog, or vice versa. You know, its power and toughness is always going to be kind of a mystery, in the sense that if you have like some of these synergies, you're going to be able to take cards out of your graveyard to potentially grow the Goyf, or you're going to be able to put cards in your graveyard to then get rid of them to then also grow the Goyf, and it kind of makes combat math a little bit difficult here. We have a lot of powerful delve spells in the modern format. You know, like Murder's Cut is probably one of the best ones, where you essentially get a removal spell that's going to delve, you know, 4 cards and giving your creature +4/+4 and killing a creature is going to be awesome. Plus we have some of these other escape cards where you can just exile cards from your graveyard to pay like the escape cost, and this is like another repeatable way that you can do this over and over and over again to kind of continue to grow Goyf. So I actually think that this is probably one of the better creatures in Edge of Eternities here. I think that this is probably one of the most likely creatures here early on that is going to see play, outside of like maybe some of these other colorless Eldrazi's, which kind of brings us to like this anti-casual Vestige. 6 mana 7/5. Whenever this creature leaves the battlefield, draw a card. Then you may put a permanent card with mana value less than or equal to the number of lands you control from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. So you're able to play this for Warp, and it's going to allow you to cast a spell for free, because Warp means that the creature is going to leave the battlefield at the next end step. So then you're able to so mana value less than or equal to the number of lands you control from your hand on the battlefield tap. So you're able to, like, in ways like you have even more lands in play, you just pay 4 mana to warp this, and then it leaves, you're able to cast it later, and you still have like 6-7 lands in play, so you're able to put like a 6 or 7 drop into play, which again can be pretty nice. And the fact that too that you're casting this card in particular, even things that you see like Bygone Colossus, where you can cast these very expensive cards for really cheap. You can get some benefit of like up the beanstalk style things, even though it is banned. On top of that too, just being able to trigger things like Ugin from the the Tarkir. The new Tarkir set, where you can start blowing up like colored permanents and stuff like that. And then there's like some of these other cards I think are really cool, but I'm probably going to see like too much of an impact, like Uberoid, the plant worm, that puts X+1/+1 counters on each creature you control, where X is this creature's power. So this is something that will kind of grow out of control over time. You're putting +1 counters on each creature you control. This is a creature, so like the first time you'll put 1, 1 counter up to 2, and then you'll go, it'll put 2 counters on everything, it puts it up to 4, and then 4, and so on. Ends up getting out of control relatively quickly, especially if it's going to sit on the battlefield for a while, and if you have other ways to pump it up to just put more counters, even in like a one-shot purpose, you're still going to be in a pretty good place here. But 4 mana for like a 1/3, and just even kind of hoping to go to combat with it is a lot to ask, I would say. But again, in like a solo format like Standard, this might just be totally fine. Frenzy Baloth, its neighbor right next to it, double green for a 3/2, can't be countered, trample haste, creatures you control can't be countered, combat damage can't be prevented. This is essentially kind of like a mini... This is kind of like a mini like questing beast, right? Where it's a very aggressive creature, obviously. 3 mana or 2 mana 3/2 haste. Your creatures are going to be uncounterable. Combat damage can't be prevented, so your opponent can't do any like weird shenanigans to like essentially try to like fog you out and like time walk through that sort of effect. You're just going to be able to get in there and get in massive amounts of damage, and really has a hard time getting blocked by some of the early creatures in the format. So pretty honestly a really aggressive and a really cool card for me personally. We have some of these other cards that we kind of seen, like Sunset Saboteurs, are really interesting. Timeline Color is kind of giving me like the underdog vibes, where it's a 2 mana 2/2 with haste, and you can cast the card from your graveyard using its warp ability. So you can pay a black and 2 life to cast it from your hand or graveyard. For its warp cost, you're going to be able to attack with it that turn, and then it's going to leave the battlefield, and you're able to cast it for 2 black, and then still get a haste creature. It's just a very annoying card where if your opponent's not going to exile it, it's just going to continue to come back and deal damage. We have a 2 mana 4/1 with Menace, and then Ward discard a card. So, and then whenever this creature attacks, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature your opponent controls. If you're able to keep the board clear, you're obviously not going to worry about this drawback, and your opponent's going to discard a card to target it. This is just a very aggressive 2-drop creature. LG Alkalite, a 4 mana 4/4 lifelink. Whenever one or more creatures you control deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card and lose a life, and at the beginning of your end step, if a non-land permanent left the battlefield this turn, or a spell was warped from warped this turn, create a 2/2 colorless robot creature token, so you'll be able to fuel itself to ideally deal damage. It also has lifelink, so you're able to kind of just continue to gain life and hopefully draw a bunch of cards to be able to close out the game. Nova Hellkite is another one of those interesting warp creatures. Flying Haste, when it enters, deals 1 damage to target creature and opponent controls, and you can warp it for 3 mana. So you essentially have a 3 mana 4/5 Flying Haste, and you'll be able to pick off a small creature, or potentially make blocking very awkward for your opponent and some of these other red-based decks, and you'll be able to cast it later for 5 mana, which is still like a 5 mana for a 4/5 Flying Haste, and be able to, again, ping something else, and making combat a little awkward is going to be pretty neat there. We have Exalted Sunborn in this really cool border. Flying Lifelink, whenever one or more tokens will be created in control, create twice that many tokens. Those twice that many tokens are created instead. Warp for 2 mana, so you get a 2 mana 4/5. This doesn't have haste, so you're not able to attack with it or anything, but this is like a cheap, a thing early on that you could play cheap, that then you can go and say like activate a, well, I guess you probably have enough, like more than enough mana at that point, but it's like a cheap way where you can get like this token doubling ability right off the rip, and then later cast it for 5 mana, and then use your mana to be able to make another token to get kind of immediate value from it. Archenemy's Charm, triple black, exile target creature, planeswalker, just really good removal there. Return up to 1 or 2 target creatures and or planeswalkers from your graveyard or your hand. Helps you be pretty grindy in some of those like mid-range matchups. Or put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature control, gains lifelink until end of turn. So like Archenemy's Charm is kind of like the inverse of like Gix's Command, where you got to pick 2 of those things, and of course there's like another ability on Gix's Command. So being able to have access to like one of these is really nice, honestly, to have, and just kind of have that flexibility. We've seen like Archdruid's Charm from Merge of Carlisle Manor, which is still going to be in the format, so we will probably see like the rest of the cycle show up in Standard at some point. Starfield Vocalist, permanent entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger. It triggers an additional time. The Exalted Sunborn we already went over. Quantum Riddler, where you can warp it for 2 mana, and then it'll enter a draw card. And then if you have 1 or fewer cards in hand and you draw 1 or more cards, you draw that many +1 instead. We have a Stelly Reclaimer that kind of looks like a a like Flicker Wisp type card. 5 mana, 5/4 flying. When this creature enters, return target non-creature, non-land permanent card with mana value X less graveyard, where X is the amount of mana spent to cast this creature. You can warp it for 3 mana. You get something back that costs 3 or less. Just really good value there. We see like Emissary Escort, which is gets plus X+O, where X is the greatest mana value among artifacts you control. So it could potentially be a big boy there. And just some of these other like really interesting cards, of course, like the Shocklands coming back and beautiful art, and Terminal Velocity being the last card that we'll look at. Put an artifact or a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. That permanent gains haste. Whenever the permanent leaves the battlefield, it deals damage equal to its mana value to each creature, and at the beginning of the next end step, sacrifice this permanent. So, I mean, this is pretty insane. I mean, 6 mana to do this is, basically in standard. While we don't have like an Emrakul or something like that we can put into play, and this essentially is like, it's not ending the game, but I'm going to put this into play. You're going to sacrifice a bunch of permanents, you're going to take a bunch of damage, and you have to basically rebuild and reestablish control before I'm able to find another piece to essentially finish off the game. But I mean, we've seen also from like some of these stations as well, where they come in, they're going to do something pretty powerful, and then they're going to leave, and they're going to be able to deal damage to equal to its mana value to each creature. So this essentially ends up being like a board wipe, getting a powerful ETB, potentially getting in a hit as well. So very interesting there. And that currently is a lot of the newer spoilers for Edge of Eternities. We're going to be going over individual cards in shorts and things like that. So if you want more short form, you don't really want like these necessarily like long-winded, and we're probably not going to see very many long. This will probably be the longest video just because we've gotten a decent amount of spoilers here over the last few days. We're going to be trying to go over them more often, and hopefully we won't be getting kind of flooded with them. So be sure that if you want to see more of these videos, that you of course subscribe to the channel, ring the notification bell, all that fun happy stuff. And stay tuned for more spoilers. We're going to be going over probably one of the coolest decks in Standard tomorrow, so definitely be on the lookout for that. And yeah, I appreciate y'all for hanging out, watching kind of my evaluation on some of these cards that are coming out in the new Edge of Eternity set. I look forward to diving deep into this and getting into the draft format and all that stuff. So definitely be on the lookout for those kinds of videos. And yeah, that's going to do it for me this video. Hope y'all enjoyed it. I hope to see you all in the next one.